I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. Every business faces the same challenge. How do we know if our marketing efforts will result in new sales? We often spend a lot of money on Google ads and email campaigns, attending conferences and posting on LinkedIn, but to what end? Behind the veil of all this effort is the mysterious complex soup of human motivation, automation, and targeted messaging. And yet somehow sales are made. But do we really know how? And what caused a person to say yes to an offer versus a no? Well, my next guest on the Business of Intuition believes that we need to do two things. One, to focus our attention on our ideal customer and build campaigns around solving their key problems and helping them reach their ultimate desires. And two, to approach marketing as a trial and error, iterative process that would get you closer and closer to what works without spending an arm and a leg. Mike Maynard is the managing director and CEO of Napier Group, a $7 million PR and marketing agency for B2B technology companies. He is a self-professed geek who loves talking about technology, and he believes that combining the measurement, accountability, and innovation that he has learned as an engineer with a passion for communicating helps make Napier the kind of company that can allow clients to achieve their marketing goals even sooner. Mike Maynard on the Business of Intuition. Well, Mike, thank you very much for being a guest on the Business of Intuition. And your day is just ending there in UK as ours is just starting here on the West Coast of the United States. I know that you've got a lot of background in marketing, but I wanted to start with maybe one of the most basic of questions that sometimes people ask. What's the difference between sales and marketing, and who should be leading whom? What do you think?
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, Dean. That's a challenging question to start off with. It sounds so simple. Interestingly, I mean, the difference between sales and marketing is blurring. And you're seeing more and more marketing becoming more like sales, and actually sales becoming more like marketing as well. So I'll give you some examples. When we're working with clients that sell products online, we're fundamentally driving sales. So you could say we're selling that. But equally, if I look at a lot of the sales teams, particularly for some of these companies selling to enterprise, they're doing all these things like social selling. They're being active on LinkedIn. I mean, they're basically doing marketing. So what's the difference? It's kind of blurring. I mean, basically, marketing is about getting people interested and wanting to buy, and sales is about closing the deal to me. That seems to be the difference. But there's such a big overlap. It's hard to say one or the other.
So from a lead generation perspective, or from that whole pipeline process that one would go through from unknown person to now they're a client, just to reiterate, it sounds like traditionally we would always say that marketing is on the front end. Let's get the interest. I'm just repeating what you said. And then once we got the interest, those in sales will close the deal.
That's actually a great summary. And if you think about the way a lead progresses through, you start off trying to raise awareness, you generate a contact. If that contact meets certain criteria, they become marketing qualified. And then typically you hand that over to sales and they determine whether they're sales qualified. So the marketing qualification might be, for example, I don't know, I sell to electronics engineers. So if this guy's an electronics engineer, that's marketing qualified. The sales qualification might be that, has he got a project and would that project use our parts? And so the salesperson is really looking to see whether there's a need at the point. So that kind of is a good indication of where people sort of tend to draw the line. But as I say, trying to be, too obsessive about it, I think is really a bad thing. I think you need to be flexible. And frankly, sales and marketing need to work together.
We worked for a marketing group out of ExxonMobil for a while. We did a lot of interactions with them. And what I was hearing from them was their perspective, and I want to get your thought, is that in organizations where you have the ability to have sales and marketing is the strategic side. They're the ones who sort of creating the larger vision and the strategy, the demographics, the psychographics, all the stuff that sort of gets us focused, and then the marketing goes off and implements against that. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, I think that's the way us marketing guys would like to see it. I mean, I've been
We'd
in
like
sales
to see it, maybe
well.
not how it really is.
We'd like to be the strategic, the thinking side, and the sales guys are just there, picking up the orders. But actually, I'm not sure that's true. If you look at some of the really great sales teams, they're incredibly strategic as well. They know who's going to spend the most money, who's going to be the easiest to convert, and they're really focused on a clear strategy of how to generate the most revenue for the company. So I mean, yes, there is strategy in marketing, but I think there's also strategy in sales, to be fair.
Well, let me ask you this, though. So COVID has been a rather large disruptor in so many different industries. And if I'm listening to this conversation, say I'm a business owner who could be your sweet spot, what has changed in sales or marketing as a result of the last 2 or 3 years?
Oh, that's such a good question, Dean. It's something that's changed quite a lot. And we're moving back towards pre-COVID kind of approaches, but we're certainly, I don't think we're going to be back to the way things were. So during COVID, salespeople couldn't visit customers. It was a fundamental problem. And a lot of salespeople have driven most of their business by visiting customers, face-to-face meetings. And so marketing became more and more important because more of that customer journey was happening before the customer started talking to the supplier. And so more and more it was, typically marketing is seen as that bit before the customer actually starts phone conversations or email interactions with an individual. So it grew bigger and bigger as part of that customer journey, part of the sales process. And now there has been a little bit of a step back because obviously salespeople are able to go out a bit more, they're a bit more proactive. But personally, I think that there's been a move away from contacting salespeople early in the process of buying, and it's moving later and later. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. There might be a small correction after COVID, but it's heading more and more there. And that's why marketing is becoming more important because it's responsible for probably the majority of that process the customer goes through. And then sales get involved at the end to close the deal. Now, that's not to say sales isn't important because if you don't close the deal, no amount of marketing is going to help. But I think, looking at things are changing, and we're seeing a definite trend to companies to move some of their sales budget into, what conventionally would be called marketing activities.
So do you see at some point down the road, Mike, as you were to look out into the future, as we get more automation into our businesses, that the sales and the marketing functions will be the same? We will no longer have the division between the two, that you will have a person who does both. They take on the front end marketing lead generation, but they take it to the finish line. They develop the relationship, they close, they continue to service that client. Is that where we're heading?
I love that question. I mean, HubSpot is an organization that came up with Smarketing, which is sales and marketing all mushed together, trying to push that idea. I think the honest answer is no. There will be small organizations where, one person's responsible for sales and marketing, but it's a resource thing rather than a strategic decision. But in large companies where you've got the ability to separate them, you are trying to do two different things. And to be honest, great salespeople, they're focused on closing business. And they're really focused on, relatively short timeframes. Marketing tends to be a much longer time frame. And it's really hard to have one person spend half their time thinking about long-term, moving people through, getting to the point where they're interested and can start a conversation, and then suddenly switch and think, right, that conversation to sale, I've just got to close the deal. So I think it's really hard to do it as one team or one person. It's something that actually does work better being separated.
So so the reality, if you're a smaller company where you may not have resources to be able to have two separate departments that might collaborate together, you may have 1, 2, 3, 4 people who could, in a sense, take care of the whole process. I mean, I think when we first started off, you did everything. You did sales, marketing, accounting, and you washed the toilets, right? So that's just the nature of the size of your company. But you're saying as you get a certain size, it does make sense, even in this automated world in which we are continuing to head, that the separation between the two is awesome, the best and most fruitful. To follow up with that, What's the main personality difference between a salesperson and a marketing person? Because they seem like slightly different animals, which might go to the reason why you want to have them separate in the first place.
That's really interesting. Now it's getting into stereotypes that I could
upset
my friends in
generally
sales now.
speaking, yeah. Well, let's talk archetypes. How's that? We make it nice and easy.
Yeah, so I think some of it is time frame, and obviously it varies between industry. I mean, if you're working for Boeing selling airplanes and you're in sales, you're thinking multi-year sales cycles. So
right.
So it is very different in terms of industries, but in general, a salesperson is much more focused on the short term. They're much more focused on what can I sell this month, this quarter, this year. Marketing is much more looking over a broader time frame. And also, I think one of the big differences is sales is very personal.
Yes.
So sales, typically, you're selling to an individual. One individual is going to give you a purchase order. So you're very focused on individuals, whereas marketing, you tend to be focused on what marketing people would call audiences, which is individuals, but a lot of them all grouped together. And I think those are the kind of differences. Sales is much more one-to-one. Marketing is much more one-to-many. Marketing can tend to be longer. And I'm going to be honest, typically marketing people are less focused on metrics than salespeople. I'm not sure that's a good thing. But marketing people tend to quite like fuzzy metrics.
You said marketing people are what?
They're less focused on measurement, on metrics than salespeople.
I'm surprised that you said that. That's why I wanted to ask, because I would have thought the other way around, that the marketing person was more data focused and centric, like how many clicks, how many opens, how many, versus the salesperson, which is I'm focused on metrics in only in when it relates to whether we made the sale or not. But you're saying that it's the other way around?
Well, this is where you get into like a bit of a dark secret for marketing. So,
all right, so we won't tell anybody, just between you and
me. Nobody listens, right? Nobody's listening.
Exactly, right? Just our mothers.
So salespeople are very focused on metrics. The metric they care about is sales, and the reason is typically the amount they get paid depends on how much they sell. It's really simple. And they're really focused on that metric, and it's very much a business metric. They're often not focused on profit. They're more focused on turnover, which could be one downside, but generally speaking, they're really clear. Marketing people, they like data, but data's more a comfort blanket than an objective. And so, you'll be talking about, well, this quarter we managed to increase click-through rates by 2%.
Right.
And everyone goes, oh, that sounds amazing. That's fantastic. What does it mean for the business? I don't know.
Nothing. Who knows? Exactly.
And so I think the really hard metrics, business metrics, is much harder to get marketing people engaged with. And part of that is culture. Part of that is because they're not necessarily looking one-to-one. They're not looking to close a deal. It's much more, how do we get these people more likely to speak to our salespeople and buy? So it is hard to measure. But I definitely think, I believe marketers should be more focused on real business metrics.
So then to that point, Mike, then how does the marketing team and the sales team best collaborate when in some ways they are looking at different things, incentivized by different things, might even have a different sort of personality style that makes them tick? How do we, because you always hear those are some of the friction points. Marketing and sales aren't getting along, and so on and so forth. I think I even heard a rumor that Microsoft created PowerPoint as a way for marketers to communicate with salespeople, and it became a product, right? I don't know whether that's lore, whether that's true, but nonetheless, I think it speaks to that friction. How do we create the sales and marketing team to be able to coexist and collaborate the best together?
I think that this is a challenge people are still working on. So, you always get the discussion between marketing and sales. We've generated this many leads. Yeah, they're all terrible. It's not a very helpful discussion, And I think most marketers, always roll their eyes when times are tough. Salespeople aren't selling anything. All the salespeople think they can do marketing. When times are good, the salespeople are just earning their commissions because they're doing really well. But I think you've got to talk, and you've got to talk in the other person's language. And this comes down to what I said about objectives. Marketing teams saying, yeah, we've doubled our click-through rate. And the sales team's going, what does that mean? I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
And the sales team saying we need to double sales. The marketing team going, well, tell me that in terms of impressions and click-through rate. And I think you've got to really try and stop sitting in your own little silo, and actually get engaged with the other group and try and talk their language, try and understand it. And also try and build a big picture. And this is incredible. I mean, if you look at the amount of money being spent on like digital marketing tools, so marketing automation or email tools, CRMs, and then the number of companies that actually can track how they're driving sales. So what our marketing activities actually cause people to buy. We're just in like the Stone Age there. This tracking from the start of marketing through to actually getting a sale, it's really hard to do. Very few companies can do it. And I'm not sure any company really does it brilliantly unless they're doing online sales. But where you've got a physical, sales force, a human sales force, it's incredibly hard to do that tracking. And that's something that I think has got to improve, over the next few years. Is taking that whole view of the customer from when they first find out about your business and your product, all the way through to when they buy from a salesperson. And that's something that's got to improve because we really struggle with that today.
So that's a great point that you just made. And if we were able to track from point A to point Z in the entire, I don't know you, now I'm a customer experience, all those little steps, my sense is that if we had that tracking, if we had that entire scope figured out, and the sales group and the marketing group also saw and understood that, that would also create more of a collaborative environment between those two different departments because we're seeing the same thing, we're monitoring the same thing, we're tracking the same thing.
So absolutely, that would definitely help because you're talking about this whole process as one thing rather than just focusing on the marketing side or focusing on the sales side. So it would really help. But the problem is that even if you get the tracking, it's very hard to know what made a difference. So, I'll give you an example. You might see 3 television ads, 2 ads online, and get an email. And we know you've had all these touches from marketing, but which one caused you to pick the phone up to the sales guy? And that's almost impossible to know. So we can build some knowledge, and certainly there's a lot of opportunity to build more. But ultimately, it's understanding that marketing is very complex. It's long term. It's not. There's no magic bullet you can get that is send an email, get sales. It just doesn't work like that.
How do you then find out? I mean, you said that few companies do a good job at this, but it sounds like some of them are doing a good job at this. There's got to be somebody out there who's actually been able to crack this nut. What is it that they're doing that the rest of us aren't?
So I think what they're doing is they've got marketing and sales to talk to. It comes back to what we said earlier. I think where you've got marketing and sales as two divisions that fundamentally compete against each other. I mean, it's crazy in most organizations, but actually marketing is trying to compete against sales. It's really hard to get any useful tracking. But where you've got two teams that are working together, then I think you start getting good information. And some of that information is not necessarily quantified information. A lot of it is more anecdotal from the sales teams. And so, for example, you might run a campaign to talk about a particular product. The sales team start going back and going, yeah, actually, do you know what? Half the people I talk to already know about that product. That's amazing. I don't have to explain what it is. I don't have to talk about, why we make it, how it fits with our portfolio. I can start selling that product straight away because I know about it. It's making my job easier. Right. And that's really what marketing should be doing. So that anecdotal feedback is really important.
So maybe you're indicating this by what you just said, but let me just come right out and ask another question. If it's new, maybe it is. But at the back end, we've got the sale. We are with the client. We're delivering service. Would it not be a good idea, I'm leading the witness here, to go back to them and say, what was it that got you to want to work with us? At what point in this cycle did you go, yes, we want to go ahead? Do you recommend companies go back and sort of do a post-mortem with their clients and say, why did you decide to work with us? And speak to that and whether there's any value in that.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, Dean. I mean, some companies can do it and do get some information from it. There's two fundamental problems with that. Firstly, I think most great salespeople, when they've made the sale, they just shut up. because they know
Right.
once they got that purchase order, the only thing they can do is lose it.
They got to be a hello. Let's not blow it. Right.
Yeah. So it's a really sensible thing to do as well. Because as soon as they go, well, tell me why you decided to work with us, instantly the customer can come back and say, well, yeah, we can do some of this research, help you out, but where's our discount for helping you? So I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. The other thing as well is quite often the customer doesn't know. And there's two reasons the customer doesn't know. I mean, firstly, typically it's seeing multiple marketing campaigns over a long period of time. So
by competing companies.
Yeah, so it could be by competing companies, but also by your company. They'll see, maybe some email campaigns, some ad campaigns, some PR. That they won't remember it all. They won't know quite what it is. And then the second thing is where we work, which is business to business. There's not one buyer typically.
Right.
Typically, there's a buying committee you've got to influence, and to try and work out what influenced all of these people, that's really tough. So we see it, and in a very simplistic way, Google tries to tell you. So if you look at Google Ads, if you sell online, Google will tell you how much your ads contributed to the sale,
right?
And that's give you a value. So that's the attributed value, the value it's giving to the ads. And so there might be an ad that you do for search, it might be an ad in display, and might split the value. But Google has multiple different ways of splitting that value in a really simple part of marketing. So how do you split the value of PR and an email? Which one is worth the most money? It's almost impossible to know.
I get that, because especially if it's not an online sale, where you can't always know exactly what created what chicken or egg. How did we get here? I can see where that's really tough. So then, to your point, then how do you create a marketing campaign that will work?
So the answer is, and this is the great thing, and it's the thing that I think digital marketing has brought to marketing that didn't really exist before, and it's a willingness to test. And to me, that's really exciting. So particularly if you're focused down on an audience, you know what you're doing, you can test different things. So it might take some time to actually see some impact, but you could, for example, test sending more emails, test sending fewer emails. You could test more PR, less PR. And then see what happens with the leads, both the number and the quality. And the quality is where you've got to talk to the sales teams to work out, whether they're the right leads or not. But you can do this testing, and this is something that I think marketers are much more open to because they're used to testing on, the Google platform, for example, on ads. And so now we can do it on PR. We can spend, more money on trade show or less money on a trade show. We can do more follow up of the leads after the trade show. I mean, everything is testable if you want to.
Good point. So back to the question, though, about how do you create a marketing campaign that will work, is it to say that part of that needs to be a process of iterative, almost agile marketing approach where we try something, we'll try it out and see if it works. But then the question then is, how do you know it works? I mean, that's kind of going back to this adage that it seems to be there's sort of a secret sauce that does create sales, but we don't know really how it did.
Yeah, so I love that question. I mean, the first thing is you're going to take a guess, right?
Yeah.
You're going to, whether it's through best practice or asking someone who's done it before or just looking what the organization's done before, roughly where to aim. So you can aim your first shot, and it's not going to be a million miles away, hopefully. And then you can test, and you can start moving things. So you just slightly change where you're aiming, and to see the impact. And the problem you have with marketers, this is something I referred to earlier, is that there can be an obsession with these marketing metrics. So things like click-through rate. Hey, our click-through rate's gone up, it must be better. Well, it might be better. It's a positive thing. It's probably more likely to be better than if it went down, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right thing. What you've got to do is look at the impact on sales. And so this is why it can take some time, is you've got to look at whether you're driving through more sales or fewer sales. And if you've got a sales cycle that's 6 months, your test is going to last 6 months before you start seeing an impact. And so you've really got to think long term. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why marketing and sales is different, is because it's really hard to do those tests without being prepared to wait for a result.
Yeah, right. All right, so here's some basic 101 stuff, right? Marketing and sales for dummies sort of question. I'm a small business owner, let's say it's a B2B business, right? I'm listening to Mike here. He's got some interesting ideas. What's a couple of things that I should really be paying attention to or doing if I know that my marketing and sales is sort of floundering? It's sort of based on what they know about the owner and maybe these long-term relationships, and the owner's trying to get away from all this heavy lifting. What's a recommendation for that smaller business B2B that you might be able to say, do a couple of things to play with to start off?
Yeah. So, I mean, we see this sometimes with startups, where they've won, one or two opportunities, and they're like, where do we go now? Because we knew we get one because it's the company we worked for before we left, and we've got another one because friend of a friend, and how do we grow the business? And I think the worst thing you can do is just start marketing. I mean, that's the worst thing you can do, because what you need to do is make sure that what you're going to do is going to reach the right people and it's going to be effective. So in marketing, this has only been around for about 20 years. There's this concept of the ideal customer profile. And so you create this fictitious person. It's also called a persona, particularly over in the UK, we call it personas, but ICP in the States. And you create a description of who would be your perfect customer. So as an example, let's say you run a dog grooming salon. Who's your perfect customer? Number one, they got a dog. Number two, they care about their dog's appearance, so it might well be a pedigree job. Number three, they're probably relatively affluent, and you can start building this picture up, and then you get this picture of somebody who's maybe it's a married couple with a couple of kids, they've got a dog, they really care about it, that they've done pretty well, they're middle management type of, and you can start thinking, well, where would these people consume media? What would they look at? And you can say, I don't know, let's say, for example, there's quite young children, say, well, probably they're on Facebook because, grandma and granddad are on Facebook. They want to see pictures of the kids. They're probably on Facebook. So maybe Facebook's the right way. So you can then start building this kind of picture of your ideal customer. And then you can test it. And you can run an ad and you can test it, or you can run PR, or you can run, whatever marketing you want to do and test it. But I would say there's no point trying to aim for something if you don't have a target. And so, my best advice is really be ruthless on this ideal customer and really, be prepared to say, I'm not going after that because it doesn't fit with my ideal customer. And if you believe your ideal customer doesn't search on Google, don't run Google ads. It doesn't matter if the whole rest of the world's running Google ads. Don't run Google ads. And I think it's really important to say, think of that customer and really market to them. And you'll hear it a lot. So in larger marketing teams, you'll hear people talk about these ideal customers as though they're real people. So, for example, we've got one persona we call New Technology Nancy. And it's kind of the marketer that's really driven by marketing technology. And so we will, talk a lot about, New Technology Nancy as though she's a real person, and what would she like, and what would she, and it's cringy at first. It really, does feel awkward, but actually what it does is it makes you focus down on the right person. And if that ideal customer profile is right, you're going to hit, a huge percentage of people that are potential customers for you by targeting them, because typically those ideal customers cluster together. So I mean, it's only one thing, but I'd say that would be my first thing I'd do is really, really focus down on who would be your perfect customer.
That's a great idea. It reminds me many years ago when we first started off up in Seattle, Washington, we had a radio station that was one of our initial clients, and they did just what you said, Mike, because they had such a clear persona and this ideal customer. I forget, but this was a kind of a easy listening, top 40s kind of radio station. And their target market was a particular type of female, and they had a name for her. And in fact, when you go into the sound booth, when they're doing their radio station and they're, queuing up the next song, there was a picture of the person that is fictitious, but they would be speaking directly to them so they could keep focused, so that their language and the words that they use were always in congruity with that particular persona. In fact, even down in Phoenix, I think another big healthcare company that we've worked with had a cutout of the ideal patient. Now, of course, they serve all patients, right? But the one that they really focused on in terms of mission and vision and values and the whole life cycle of care, they had a particular female, I think she was an Hispanic female, had a certain number of kids and so forth. And they brought this cutout to board meetings. Like she had a seat. So the board and everybody always knew that this was who we were focusing on. And I thought it was brilliant and groundbreaking to be able to do that. So what about for the companies that are larger? In addition to, and I'm assuming large companies should also go through this process, but is there any particular ideas, tips that you would say, because of the size, these are the things that we should really be focusing on, in addition to what you just said, if we're a medium or large company?
I mean, that's an interesting question, Dean, because actually, I'm not sure that size makes a huge amount of difference. I think actually, sometimes size can be a disadvantage in marketing because you've got so much inertia, you've got so many people to convince that it's quite difficult to do things. So, I'd say focusing on your ideal customer and really saying, this is who we're going after is important, whatever size you are. Typically, larger companies focus a lot on the customer journey. So every time they can actually interact with the customer, they then try and map what happens. And so you see these amazing complicated maps with 100 interactions and how well they do and how the customer feels and all of this. So, they do a good job of that because they've got resources. I mean, smaller businesses can do that. I think the one thing that large businesses can do, other than volume, I mean, large businesses can do lots of different campaigns, but they can test more. Large businesses have the ability to run lots and lots of tests because that volume is high. And that is their superpower, if you like. That's the way they can test. You know, you hear about Google testing thousands of shades of particular colors on search results to find out the one that makes a difference. You think that's crazy. And then you find out that, you know, the difference between one shade and another is an extra $100 million a year in terms of clicks for Google. So I think testing is really the opportunity. I mean, it's sometimes hard because sometimes large organizations are quite conservative. Nobody wants the test to fail. And there's no point testing if the tests never fail. But I do think that's a superpower that big organizations have.
I want you to speak to this idea that customer experience has some relationship to employee experience. I know that in healthcare, we've spent a lot of time there. There's a lot of emphasis on what's the experience of our patients. And some companies are getting better at understanding, maybe because they're being forced to, because of the great resignation that we're having here in the States and the burnout rates, and 500,000 nurses are leaving the industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Talent is the biggest issue that people are having, that there's now a resurgence or a real focus on. We got to get better at the employee experience, because we know that, one, they will stay longer, they'll be more productive. But two, we also have some sense, whether we can document it or not, that it will increase the experience of our customer, or in this case, our patient. So you mentioned before we started this conversation that your organization has moved towards an employee-owned model. Can you speak to the benefits of that and how it's changed your culture?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think customer experience is becoming more and more important. And the only people who deliver customer experience are employees.
Yes.
So by definition, you know, the employees have got to be the ones delivering that great experience. And if they're not happy, they're probably not going to be that good at delivering it. So we've actually taken the decision, or I've taken the decision to basically move ownership for myself to the employees. So the employees now own 70% of Napier. It's something we've done recently. And so that means the employees can share in the profits, but it also means the employees actually have a real, genuine say in how the company's run. They don't have a day-to-day sale. So it's much like owning stock in, you know, Amazon or, you know, any publicly traded company. But they can come to meetings and they can say, we want to do this. And obviously the management team has to listen. And ultimately, I mean, the ultimate, you know, power of the employee owners is they can actually fire the directors. And it very rarely happens.
They can fire the directors. Okay, so that's the big difference that you just, I'm sorry for interrupting, but, you know, a lot of organizations might be listening to this and saying like, well, Mike, yeah, we want people to come to us, the leadership team, the owners, with ideas. That's part of our culture. But what you just said was a big differentiator, which is we could be fired by those people.
Exactly. It's a huge thing. And it is no different to a public company. You know, if you buy 20% in a public company, typically you can put yourself on the board. Typically, you can actually, you know, start putting pressure to get rid of directors. And if you've got a majority shareholding, you can actually fire directors in a public company. So it's no different from that situation. The only thing is we've basically got two shareholders, myself and the employees. Whereas obviously Amazon's got millions and millions of shareholders, so it's much more diluted. But actually, you group together a bunch of Amazon shareholders. If there's some activism around shareholding, we've seen that with some companies. Then you start seeing the shareholders having real, genuine power there. So it's no different from being a public company. I think a lot of small business owners get very scared about this concept of employee ownership because you have that nuclear option of being fired. But actually, if you're being fired, there's something wrong. And you're probably not enjoying it, and it's probably not working out. It's probably not the end of the world.
So how long ago did you do this migration from ownership with yourself to now shared ownership with your employees? And maybe more importantly, that I want to find out as well after you answer the first question is, what's been the change in your culture?
So that's an interesting question. It's really early days. So when people are listening to this, I guess it's going to be around about 2 months since we actually became employee owned. When we're recording now, it's a little bit earlier, but so it's really early days. I think we're still working on it, and I've talked to a lot of companies who are employee owned. It's quite there's some good tax incentives in the UK, so we can pay employees bonuses, and up to a certain amount, they're tax free. Okay. So that's a really big incentive. So
that's part of it. Okay.
Yeah. So it's quite a lot of incentive. It's really hard because actually, you don't want the employees jumping in and changing everything from day one. And that wouldn't be a great idea. So the answer is there's not been a huge change immediately. This is going to be one of those things that's a slow burn.
What do you hope for, though, Mike? What was the purpose behind doing this? I mean, you obviously, I get that there's a tax benefit. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's the whole thing. But explain, why did you decide to do this?
So short term, there is a feeling of ownership. There is a feeling that actually we can share in the profits. I guess there's a feeling more of equity than them and us in terms of management. So that's really positive. That's a short-term, easy win. But long-term, what we want to do is we want to get people thinking more strategically about the business. What it's like? You're in a company, and we're 35 people. You're one of 35 people. You think, nobody's going to listen to me. Maybe I shouldn't, really, really rock the boat. Now we're in a situation where actually we've got people whose job is to rock the boat. The job is to come out and say, well, what about this? What about this? Let's think about this. And so my goal is to have everybody thinking strategically about the business because nobody's got a monopoly on good ideas. There are going to be some good things. I think, particularly there's going to be some good ideas around things that will retain employees because obviously employees are going to ask the things they want and they're going to feel pretty unfettered in terms of asking for stuff. So I think that's going to be very positive. But long term as well, I think, the fact that somebody could be on a call with a client and just go, yeah, I really want this to work because this is my company. That's really powerful. And if the person believes it and the client's listening, I mean, they know that person's committed to them as a client. So I'm super excited about that, but that's going to take time. I'm realistic that it's not an overnight transformation. But give it a year or two, we're going to be having clients blown away by the fact that someone says, I'm going to make this work for you because it's my company.
I would love that. This is great. I think this is fascinating. We should connect in another year or two and just maybe have another podcast interview and say, all right, Mike, how is it now? It's been 2 years, but what have you learned about this? Because I'm sure some people would be very interested about what you've gone through, what your key lessons were. So how can people, Mike, follow you, connect to you, know what you're all about?
So if anyone wants to connect to me, obviously, LinkedIn's the place to go. Mike Maynard Napier will find me. But hey, I just love talking about business. I love talking about people about marketing. So if anyone wants to email me, my email's mike@napierb2b.com. And, I'd love to talk to them. So they're very welcome to email me direct.
Well, thank you so much for your time. You're a delight. You got chock full of great ideas. And I think a lot of people are going to find a lot of them of interest. And I hope we can stay connected here in the future.
That'd be awesome. Thanks very much, Dean.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.